Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Walk Magic video. In my last video, I finished off my 3 schools of magic essays, and in the first of those 3 videos, I really didn't want to directly pigeonhole any tradition into a particular school unless the essays made a claim, and I was commenting directly upon the essay. I tried avoiding placing any Thelemic schools or personas into a particular school, not because I don't have my opinions, but rather because I don't want to plant any seeds. I provided the information, and everyone here should make their own opinions and determinations about people and orders in the Thelemic tradition. That said, in the 3rd essay video, I do feel I railed hard against Christianity, and well, I don't want anyone misconstruing my words or intentions with that last Magic Without Tears video. My beef isn't with Jesus, per se. My beef is with what Christian organizations and the masses of followers' beliefs of Jesus have devolved into. According to the Pew Research Center, as of 2020, there were approximately 2.4 billion Christians on Earth. Whatever our feelings towards that religion, we live here with them and have to deal with them on a daily basis. While my guess is that probably too many of them are too far gone and are dogmatically enmeshed in Christianity past the point of salvation, there must be along with them those who can accept the law. While it might be better if they fully detoxed themselves from Christianity altogether, there will be those who, for their own reasons, still want to work with the Christian pantheon, but end up seeing value in accepting the law of Thelema and still want to make an attempt at occult traditions, and I believe that should be encouraged at the least. So that's where this video is aiming. Technically, anyone can be a Thelemite and work with whatever pantheon, even the Christian one, that they choose to, and that is what I want to talk about today, since I've been really wanting to make this video for a long time. The title of this video is kind of a joke also, Christians for Ra-Hoor-Khuit. It's kind of like a snarky stab at, if you've ever seen those advertisements like Jews for Christ, which is kind of like a propaganda, or if you've seen that statement come back around recently, people for leopards eating faces, it's kind of a play on that concept. So the title of the video is Christians for Ra-Hoor-Khuit. So let's dive into this. I'll start off by saying emphatically, this video is not about converting anyone. We are already living in Aleister Crowley's The Fish. If you haven't read that novel, it's an unfinished novel. Go read Aleister Crowley's The Fish. We are living in it. And if somebody is not ready for occultism, specifically Thelema, we do not do conversions. Thelema has to come from within. No one should be looking to gain quantity without quality. Thelema doesn't need a bunch of rabid dogs running amok. We do not force Thelema on anyone. I'll repeat this periodically throughout so that it is clear. Though true, everyone does magic with every intentional act every day, and that the law is for all, that the individual would only benefit from doing magic well and embracing the law and understanding it, the path of initiation and accepting the law of Thelema must come from the individual. It says in the book of the law, the slave shall serve. One of the most fatal flaws in Christianity is their ideas of mandating and coercing conversion. This video is intended to educate Thelemites and perhaps breed an air of acceptance around the fact that there will be some Thelemites who choose to work heavily or primarily with the Christian pantheon. And just to remind you, there are 2.4 billion Christians, maybe more, maybe a few less at this point, 2025, but there are a lot of people still working with that faith, and we have to deal with reality for what it is as Thelemites and acknowledge that there are a lot of people doing that. While I might roll my eyes, if you've ever seen like Christian Wicca or something, it's like, it sounds ridiculous to me, But there will be people who are drawn to that, and it is not my place to judge or condemn what somebody else does. That's their own karma. So this is meant for people who wish to learn magic, but for their own reasons are still heavily attracted to Jesus. Fine. There are moral implications of Christianity that are not always going to be aligned with Thelema, however. The person needs to be willing to alter certain views to bring their ethics and moral compass up to date with the new aeon. Also, whether Jesus existed or is the amalgamation of several pre-existing mythological figures, I find to be irrelevant. A person can create a deity, and that people have poured faith, belief, and will into the figure gives it a life of its own regardless of historical authenticity. One walking this particular path, working with the Christian pantheon in the confines of Thelema, must know, in my opinion, the comparative myths of which Christ was conceived and determine for themselves what their beliefs are on the concept of a historical figure. So we'll be exploring all of this and more in depth. Also, another preface, right? Another just disclaimer. I myself have absolutely no interest in Jesus, Mary, the 12 disciples, their version of God the Father, nor their blunderous version of the Holy Spirit. However, there are well over 2 billion Christians of various sects walking the earth, and there are many problems we are facing today which organized Christianity has either directly, indirectly, or completely unequipped to deal with, caused. It is in my opinion that if the law of Thelema is to become more widely accepted, then some sort of rehabilitation needs to occur for those who feel disenfranchised with their Christianity, but for whatever reason still feel connected to the pantheon and mythologies. There are many ways that this can happen. People can come to terms with the book of the law by, realizing its beauty. They could become disenfranchised with their religion and go through the process of self-searching, be it with phases of atheism or Satanism as an act of rebellion, which hopefully pushes them towards some type of new practice and eventually a broader horizon, culminating to exposure of Thelema at some later time. Or they can start here by maintaining their current pantheon and core doctrines of their holy book, and making the proper adjustments to bring their values up to par with the new aeon. What I can offer here is insights into how to rehabilitate through the latter, if a person wants that. If they don't want that, no one should ever have Thelema forced upon them. Again, I'm saying that we are not forcing conversions on anybody. This is for people who just want to work with Jesus and do Thelema for whatever reason they may have. But it is a thing, and it's something that we have to acknowledge is a thing. So for me, this is like a thought experiment, I guess you could say. How could this be done? I find the subject interesting. Also this subject is for those caught in the indecisive state of wanting a more serious path of attainment and maintaining a connection to their prior tradition. They may come out of that later on. I think it's better to just throw yourself into Thelema, but if you're not ready to do that, or if you've, for whatever reason, feel like attempting to work with this pantheon, well, here's information about that. So let's start off here, right? The Bible, their one holy book that a lot of them don't even read, or they know like one or two quotes, but don't really understand the symbolism. So the Bible is full of magic, and many of the people who this video is about or for may still want to use the Bible, or at least parts of it. I've used Psalms at times, true enough. And there are select passages in the Bible which I still find good when interpreted correctly. There are 3 main points I have on this subject. Firstly, since the Jewish faith began, and through the Christian movement, they all claim to be against magic. But are they really? Because it would seem that when a group of practitioners walk around a wall numerous times while praying and chanting to some unincorporated spirit to tear down the walls of an enemy, and it comes across awfully a lot like magic. Of course, they claim that what occurs is only happening because their deity is doing it. But the truth is, whether you are working with a deity, a demon, or simply focusing your will upon a particular event, and then do some kind of ritual to make your intentions occur, that is magic. Whether it be black or white depends on the situation, but it is magic. So what they really mean when they say that magic is not allowed for people of the Jewish or Christian faith is that their magic is okay and all others are not. So that is one aspect of hypocrisy that needs to go out of the window for practitioners in the new aeon. We'll mention other specific hypocrisy later on, but that's one of the first adjustments, that magic is not some evil thing. Christians do magic every day, and I'll go into like wishing well prayers later on. Secondly, interpretation of their scripture. If you're going to use a book and claim that that's your holy book, you should probably read it and understand it, you know. Also, as a cultist, we have at our disposal the tools necessary to interpret the Old and New Testament through Kabbalah, Hermeticism, numerology, Pythagoreanism, and comparative mythology. Critical thinking is mandatory. If you were going to say or do something, it must not be on blind faith. No, it must be upon understanding and will. To will, you must know. If you remain ignorant or rely upon somebody else's interpretations alone, you are setting yourself up for the potential to make a miscalculation and be misled. At least, if you make a mistake based on your own interpretation of something, you are fully responsible. If you make a mistake based on someone else's advice, you and they are responsible. And today, there is no scapegoating anymore for your actions. There is no, the devil made me do it. There is only you and your decisions. So, if you're still going to use the Bible, I suggest you actually read it and interpret it in the light of the symbolism there. Remove all the cultural adaptations and mandates that have been made in all the sects of Abrahamic religions and interpret it for yourself. Bearing in mind, you must also have a thorough knowledge of the book of the law. You should probably cross-reference what is outdated and what is acceptable. Here we go. Wishing well prayers, for example, have to stop. You need to understand your life path and true will, not pray for any medial whimsy that you want. By doing so, you bind yourself to outcomes that probably aren't aligned with your true will, but are aligned rather with your ego, which is the exact opposite of what you need. Also, since prayer is an uttered spell, casting a hope and intention for someone, in my view, is that you should never pray for anyone without their direct consent, and even then you should be cautious in doing so. And wherever it says so in the Bible, that's an outdated technology that needs to be revised, and that's another adjustment you have to make. See, by praying, you're pouring an intention out, and your intention may be altruistic and pure, a desire to alleviate someone of pain, for example. But in doing so, should your spell work, you may be doing more harm than good. If a person gets themselves into trouble, only for the consequences to be washed away by someone's magic, they will never fix the internal mechanism that allowed them to make decisions which got them into that trouble. Further, how know you that their pain wasn't going to lead to a specific series of events that would have brought about their enlightenment unforeseen by any observer? By meddling, you may have postponed their enlightenment for multiple incarnations, and now that is on you. Going back to the Old Testament, I'd argue most of it is out the window so far as their rules and bylaws go. There is no selling women or slaves. There is no mandate about what you can or cannot eat. You have the rights of Liber Oz to consider. Should you choose to do any of these things, know that you are willing to do them, and no one else has to do the same. So you could live by whatever law you choose to live by, but you also can't impose that law on anybody else. And thirdly, keep in mind that the Bible is an old technology. Using it is like choosing to use Netscape to browse the web in the year 2025. There's new and up-to-date softwares of magic. So, why one would purposefully go about using an old and out-of-date browser? Like I said, you may find some snippets which appeal, and that is fine. Sure, the New Testament has much less mandates for daily living, and is more philosophical about one's attitude towards their deity and fellow man, more in a bhakti sense. But for example, in the Old Testament, the idea that no one should eat shellfish today doesn't make sense. Maybe back when there was a higher risk of disease or lack of biological understanding, it made sense. They saw shellfish as bottom feeders and assumed that consuming the flesh of a creature who eats garbage or decomposition was the equivalent of eating that garbage oneself. And this could not give proper nutrients and was thought to poison the body rather than transfer energy from one source to another. And yeah, I could see the thought process, but today, in moderation, shellfish poses no risk to human health by and large. Hell, for all we know, shellfish allergies were observed, misunderstood, and people were told not to eat lobster as they feared it. If that's the case, hypothetically, this fear becomes commonplace and makes it into the Holy Scriptures to be passed around among the entire population. My point is, increase your critical thinking and include symbolic and periodic cultural interpretations of why that book says what it says. And if you're going to use any of it, it has to be brought up to date with what we know today and what we'll know tomorrow. This brings me to my next point. Fear. Christianity's message is clear. Love one another. Do not persecute, do not judge. If you feel someone is living foul, that is their business. The Christian's role is supposedly to be to lead by example. Today, by and large, this is not the case, unfortunately. Look at history. Christian-led persecution and genocide have plagued the earth. It has been used to justify all sorts of atrocities, from the Inquisition to slavery. Fear has been the tool in the church to keep their denizens submissive and to threaten others into conversion. Fear, I should add, bribery. Like, take for example what's happened in Haiti, if you're familiar. The church will build a hospital, but only if the people of that town convert and read this script to the people. So it's, we'll give you money to survive, but it's conversion by coercion. So I have a point to this, so just hang with me. I want to first share a little bit, and then I'll make a point on this next part. I have like a large portion here, but I grew up Roman Catholic, and everything from like how they've instilled hatred towards LGBT people. I was a kid in the 90s, and that was still going on. Today, the church has lost a lot of members. There may still be Christians, but a lot of people don't go to church anymore, especially like Roman Catholic, like I grew up, because of the bigotry, the pedophilia, just constant controversies and insanity and dangers and risks to health and all of that stuff. But back in the 90s, they still instilled in kids, and it was accepted that when other kids wanted to insult somebody in Catholic school, you would call them a fag or, you're gay, and that was the biggest insult. And the teachers never corrected that. So that gives the kids cues that, like, this is acceptable, right? And what that does is it creates this... For most people, I got over it. I had to find my own path, and I never really cared about Christianity, but it made me feel not just ostracized, but already condemned, and that starts to plant the seeds when your sexuality is one of the most important things in the human experience, especially as a Thelemite and occultist. So when you're getting these seeds planted, they create all sorts of maladies, whether it be depression, self-hatred, alcoholism, drug addiction, unnecessary rebellion that leads to self-destruction. Right, so eventually, I found the Lima, and I had to go through all of that, but they instilled these fears of, like, you're going to hell now. It's another aspect of that fear manipulation. You do something wrong, you're going to hell for all of eternity, right? Well, here's the point. I had studied, by the time I was, 23 years old, I had already studied most of the world religions and was starting to compare the similarities, seeing that they were all fine, and each had some good points that I liked, others had parts that I don't like, whatever. But upon reading my first few witchcraft books, which came at the end of studying the major world religions, right before I found the Lima, I remember pausing and thinking, am I going to hell for doing witchcraft? And for me, it was easy to uproot that because I didn't really care about Christianity. It just, so much of it does not make sense from where my perspective and my life and existence and identity and nature does not make sense for me. So I was already searching for other stuff. But even still, imagine being so enmeshed in Christianity that the second you try to do something new, you have that instant idea pop up of, oh my God, I'm going to hell, and that instant fear gets kicked up. Well, that fear needs to be uprooted. That's one of the most dangerous things, is these seeds of indoctrination that are planted in the Christian mind. To an extent, I'm empathetic. To the other extent, people need to uproot that shit. And it's like, deal with whatever's in your head, and you have to deal with reality for what reality is. Think for yourself. Make a study of Liber Libre. It says right in there, fear is failure and the forerunner of failure, period. So anytime fears that have been planted in you, there are healthy fears. You touch a hot stove, you might be afraid of putting your face on a hot stove. That's a healthy fear. It tells you not to do something stupid. But when there's no justifiable reason for a fear, it stops you from doing what you need to be doing with your life and being who you are. And that's where fear becomes dangerous, and that's where the box that organized Christianity puts most people in is very detrimental, because most people don't fit in that box, and they're being forced into it at the risk of body and mental health. After all of that said, now, if for whatever reasons you still wish to embrace the law, but work with, let's say, the New Testament or Jesus or the Pantheon, my advice is that you cross-reference everything with the values as set forth by AA literature and the Book of the Law, Liber Oz, and if something contradicts those, especially Liber Oz, reevaluate what is correct based on dealing directly with reality. Forget what some preacher told you sitting on the pulpit. Think for yourself. Alright, let's talk about the Pantheon, and then we're going to focus in on Jesus. The best recommendation I can give on this front is to get a copy of 776.5 by James Eshelman, learn how to read the Magician's Tables, and look at the Pantheon as placed in the Tree of Life. The spheres and paths all have characteristics that the saints and patronage of Christianity are in some way connected to or synonymous with. Yes, even Christianity could be synonymous with the paths in Tepherth. You can then look at other pantheons and see how the Christian mythos is not so different from religions past and present. So far as figures of Christianity go, they too mostly need revision or at least some adjustment to how they are viewed. Take Mary the Virgin. She's basically the veiled Isis. And the idea of sexual chastity needs to be shunned as the ideal. That's first and foremost. She must then be unveiled, her skirt lifted, and we should not accept rape, be it from a deity or a person. I think that's one of the most important things, is to reject the idea that some deity can come and impregnate you at any time at once. Apopantos, if you want to call him Jehovah, Apopantos, Jehovah. Any god that would not seek consent is more demon than God, in my opinion, anyway. So it's like, you want to pour your energy and worship and devotion into that's your choice, but at least look at that for what it is. Another figure, Mary Magdalene. I don't believe any of these characters existed, but like I said, that doesn't matter. I'm just going off of what people believe about them. Mary Magdalene was allegedly a whore that Jesus kept around. Well, as the whore, she could be synonymous with Babylon, if it's looked at it that way. Or, as many suppose, perhaps as the wife of Jesus. That could be a potentiality. It's written by Crowley, and Delamites often mention whenever Jesus is mentioned, that the mythological figure of Jesus is a mix between several pre-existing mythologies. He is the savior of the world like Krishna. He's the wine god like Dionysus. He was slain and reborn like Osiris, descended to the underworld like Mercury, and is often depicted as the child held by Mary like Horus is held by Isis. Mary and Isis both having immaculate conceptions. So far as the new Aeon is concerned, I think there are several ways to still work with Jesus. But the individual again has to be willing to make a few adjustments and concessions. We don't believe in God the Creator, God the Father, and Jesus isn't bringing you to heaven. You're of course free to think whatever you want. But occultists who delve in the astral understand the cycle of incarnation, death, and reincarnation quite well, and so the idea of eternal heaven or damnation is quite contradictory to our understanding of what happens to the energetic body of light, ego of the individual after they die. If Jesus is to do anything, he could be considered a solar figure of Tepherth, a placeholder for your holy guardian angel, the bridge between you and Kether, the divine light. Bearing in mind that the idea of martyrdom and the slain God are outdated technologies and not suitable for the new aeon. So here I'll offer a few alternatives in which one can acceptably work with this figure. The Sacred Heart. But again, the idea must be tweaked. Compassion is the vice of kings. So the idea of infinite patience and compassion for those who are destroying themselves, their community, and the environment, at a certain point must not be tolerated. Fulfilling the will to live requires a fight sometimes. When someone hits you, does turning the cheek truly work? Maybe in a rare instance where the offender has lived a life of abuse and ended up becoming the abuser, that could possibly work, showing them that type of hey, it's okay, I understand why you did that. But normally a bully is only going to be stopped when confronted. And that direct confrontation might be what gives them pause and changes how they go about their life interacting with people. Is that not compassion in a sense? You could, in the Book of the Law, Nuit also says, my sacred heart and tongue, like the tongue of flame above the head of the disciples as the Holy Spirit, and the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So that there's elements, there's ways that you could still, and the heart is, again, Tepherth, solar, HGA. So Sacred Heart imagery could be something interesting that one could use. Next, the child as Tepherth, baby Jesus. In 777, Animals Real and Imaginary, it lists the child on line 6 for Tepherth. The son, the soul, has two major parts, kingliness and childlike playfulness. The idea of a child savior is a little weird in the new aeon. An avatar of Yod-He Vav-He might be a better way to view baby Jesus. I think the idea is that one should use this version of the figure, the child, to work towards the state of innocence before all of life's indoctrination and traumas occurred. Working with that state of innocence is capable of bringing one closer to a clear pipeline to their HGA. Now, next, if I had a favorite, it would be this one. It would be Lucifer in Revelations as Jesus with a sword, as Mars / Ra-Hoor-Khuit. So Jesus is described in Revelation bearing a sword and coming to bestow karma, right? It's coming to lop off heads. In Revelation 22:16 it is written, quote, I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star. Again, end quote. Again, the whole Lucifer Eastern Star is a motif of the HGA descended from the light. What one does that is not aligned with their true will, ultimately they pay for. There is no postponement of karma in the new aeon. Karma is dealt with immediately. Where if you think you did something a couple days ago and you're going to deal with it next week, no, you're already dealing with it right now. It's every decision we make, we deal with. You're a result of your actions right now. There's also an aspect of Jesus where he could be invoked as a mercurial guide to the astral realm via the death of the crucifixion story, where he, like Hermes, descends into the underworld, or rather the unconscious or the astral light. There's an aspect of the Christian symbol of the fish whose scales are rainbows, and thus are mercurial, which connects Jesus with the Magus, and the saying, quote, seating at the right hand of the Father, end quote, insinuates Chakma as well. So here's solar ways to work with this figure. There's a mercurial way, and there's a Mars way, right? So that's a couple of ways that you could see Jesus through the lens of the Lema and the Book of the Law that may work. Lastly, before we close out, there's always going to be those who are going to have trouble with the idea of Tomegatherion being the beast 666. So here's my piece on that. The beast of Revelations is inevitable for the coming of Jesus in Revelation, the recoming. Revelation means revealing, not apocalypse. Apocalypsis is also Greek, which just means revelation, which means revealing. Apocalypse has come, I don't know how, I didn't research this, but it's come to mean in many people's heads it's the end of the world, and it's used that way, so it carries that connotation. But revelation just means a revealing. So the book of Revelation is a prophecy about the change of consciousness, and everything in that book is symbolic. Therefore, the only path forward is to embrace what is here and now for each person to get their shit together, not living in fear over this constant end-of-the-world death cult that organized Christianity has become. If you still think that Omega Therion is the devil, well, you could look at the tarot and see the devil's laughing at you. It's Pan with the giant penis behind him, kind of a symbol of the regeneration of Earth, reincarnation, the light descending, the light as the seed, the light as the dove, right? All of those concepts. So the devil, if you're thinking it's something to be feared and shunned, well, consider how many saints and patriarchy of Judaism and Christianity work directly with or battle demons. For example, look at King Solomon. Allegedly, he built his temple using demons which are contained in the Goetia. If you read the Book of Solomon, he has a long episode fighting with Asmodeus and trying to control Asmodeus, and it's like a whole thing. He was constantly working with demons very closely. And there's also the idea that Jesus was of the lineage of Solomon. So that's one aspect. Saint Anthony was willingly tortured by demons for his own enlightenment. He locked himself in a room, summoned a bunch of demons, or had a bunch of demons just come and battle them spiritually, and came out enlightened. And he was like, I got my shit together now. Saint Nicholas was a sorcerer and specifically did evocations in connection with necromancy, bringing children back from the dead. Though, to be fair, in that story, they were allegedly angelic entities that he evocated. Jesus confronted Satan, and understand there's a difference between Lucifer and Satan. There's a whole thing I've talked about in other videos, but Jesus confronted Satan. But this must be looked at as dealing with the subconscious, not just dealing with the external demon that wants your soul. That's not a thing. But keeper of the unconscious, yeah, we have Khoranzan as the keeper of the abyss in Enochian magic, so there's definitely some grounds for something to be worked with there with the proper lens put over. One cannot be tempted to other than their true will if they are fully committed to doing their true will in that path. So I think that's how you could look at that little story. So then with the beast, look at it maybe as the coming of solar consciousness, a change. 666 is not this demonic number. It's the number of the solar magical square. The number 6 times 111. So solar consciousness times Aleph. Aleph is the ox. Ox is a beast of burden. It does the great work. 111 is Aleph spelled in full. 6 is the number of the sun in Hermeticism. Therefore, you break those two components of 666 up. You have 111 times 6. That's what it is. It's the great work to solar consciousness. Thus, the expansion of human consciousness is coming whether you like it or not, and that's what's contained in the book of Revelation. So it's best to deal with it head on and not procrastinate in the inevitable. Human consciousness is changing, we are evolving, we're growing, and deal with reality. That's the most I could say there. So with that, there is so much more that could probably be said on this note, but I think what we've covered today is altogether enough to make a good argument for not only how Christians can embrace the law, but why they really need to do so, and how to do so, what changes need to be made if they're going to continue to work with that pantheon. Like I said, this is more a thought experiment, but I just thought it's interesting because it's a topic that I've never really heard spoken about publicly, but I've had conversations with plenty of people on the subject. And anytime Belamites mention Jesus, it's always coming from a place of hurt because they've been hurt by Christianity, so I get it. Um, I encourage people to just read the book of the law and do the work for how it's laid out. But if you're very set on working with that figure, these are some ways and some examples and suggestions and my opinions on what needs to happen for that to actually work in the confines of the Lima. So, love is the law, love under will. Catch you all in the next one.